We are back with the 6.4 notes. Again, these are optional. Okay, so you will see questions like this on the quiz that would be bonus. It's a way to eliminate another wrong answer if you had one. You will also see them on the test as bonus questions. They require a lot of work. They're a little bit tricky, but if you think you're up for it, this would be a great way to have an extra skill that you will need for future math classes anyways. Okay. All right, so here's what our goal is. This is called Gaussian elimination. It basically means we are going to use a matrix to simplify a system of equations, and we're going to do that without any variables by changing one row at a time, okay, or two rows at a time. So when we do this, here's your goal. Your goal is to get your equation, or your matrix, down into what is reduced row form or reduced row echelon form. That means that you will have ones on the diagonal and everything else will be zero. You could think about this like saying 1x with no y's and no z's gives me 3. That would mean x is 3. If we have no x's, 1 y, and no z's, that would tell me that the y is 8. If I have no x's, no y's, and 1 z, that tells me that the z is equal to 9. So even though you don't write it, you can kind of picture it in your matrix like these are all your equal signs. We don't do them that way. We don't write the equals in the middle of it, but we're solving it as if it means that, okay? All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Pause, copy everything you see here. Perfect. Now I'm going to scroll down. I would like you to pause and copy everything you see here, but listen, you need to have room to write between these boxes, and you need room to fit 4 rows of numbers in the matrix, okay? So if you can fit all of that, go ahead and copy what you see. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to do my best to let you guys copy beforehand and keep the talking to a minimum, but I am going to need to explain a lot of pieces of this, okay? All right, so first of all, let's talk about how I make the original matrix. In the original, all you are doing is taking each of the coefficients and turning them into a row. So all the numbers that come in front of the x, 2, 1, and a negative 1, that makes this row. This column, sorry. If I take all my coefficients that are with my y, negative 4, positive 2, 3, that makes my middle column. If I take all my coefficients on the z, that gives me the plus 1, negative 1 plus 2. That's my third column. And finally, all of my equal numbers, that makes my fourth column. Okay? That's where my original matrix comes from. From here, everything is me editing a row using one of these 3 rules. Okay, so you can swap rows, you can reorder them. You can multiply a row by a non-zero number, so you can't multiply by 0, but you could multiply, you could say I'm going to take half of every number in this row, or I'm going to multiply all of these numbers by a negative 3. I'm taking a row and scaling it, basically. Okay, the third thing that you can do is multiply a row by some number and then add it to another row. So for instance, I could say I'm going to take row 1 and I'm going to add it with double row 2. We're going to use these arrows to write out the codes for what you did as you change them, okay? All right, so first thing that you always want to do is try and turn this first row into a 1, okay? So if I'm going to do that, I would have to take that 2 and cut it in half. So I'm going to cut my first row, row 1, is going to get cut in half. So that's going to give me 1, negative 2, a 1/2, and a 5. Okay? While I'm there, I also notice that I can force a 0 in this row. Okay? I can do that by keeping the middle row the same, but I'm going to take my bottom row and add row 2 with row 3. So I'm going to add up each of these numbers, and whatever I get, I'm going to write them here. Okay? All right, so when I do that, I get 0, negative 1, 1, and 1. I'm going to keep the blue for the rows that I did not change. That way you can see that. And again, you can write as you go, or if you want to listen to the whole thing first and then write, I'm totally fine with that too. Okay? All right. That was our first edit to our matrix. Okay? All right, moving over. Next thing I'm trying to do, now that I have a 1 in my top column, is I'm trying to force a 0 here. Okay, so I already have the 1 in the top, and I already have a 0 in the bottom. I'm trying to force myself to get a 0 in the second column. Okay, so one way I could do that is I could take row 1 and I could subtract off my row 2. So row 1 minus row 2. I'm going to subtract each of these numbers, and whatever I get, I'm going to write it in the middle column, or the middle row, sorry. So I'm going to get 0 minus 4. This one's going to be a fraction, so 3 over 2. And the last one's going to be a 4. I'm not explaining to you all of the numbers that I'm typing in the calculator. I'm just telling you top minus the middle is leading me to what I'm writing down. Okay? All right. I am not changing my top row at all. I'm going to keep him because he already has his 1 going on. But I notice right now that I can go ahead and change my bottom to get rid of that negative that I've got going on. Okay, so just while I'm at it, I'm going to turn that negative 1 into a positive 1. That's going to help me a little bit moving forward so that it's easier to work with my operation. So I'm just going to change all the signs in this bottom row. Okay, that's all I did. I just multiplied everything by a negative to change its sign. Okay. All right, again, if you want to pause and copy, that's fine. If you want to copy at the end, I will freeze it when all the work is done. Okay. All right, next thing we're trying to do is I'm going to try to get this middle guy to turn into a 1. And in doing that, I'm going to try and get this guy to turn into a 0. So that's my next 2 goals, okay? All right, so let me zoom out. I'm going to draw my 2 arrows. I'm going to be making edits to the middle row and to the bottom row. Top row is not going to change. I'm going to keep him exactly the way he is. All right, so let's think about that. If I want to turn that middle number, -4, into a 1, that means not only do I have to divide it by 4, but I also have to get rid of the negative. So I'm going to do -1/4 of row 2. So if I do that, I get 0, +1, -3/8. And yes, you were going to have fractions. You're just going to have to get over it. And a -1. Okay. Next goal is if I'm going to try to get rid of this bottom number, if I'm going to try and turn him into a 0, I have a couple different ways I can do that. I don't want to mess with row 1 because that has this guy up here, and that's going to take away my 0. I don't want to take away my 0. So I'm going to have to do something with my middle row 2 that I had originally. So using this guy. Okay. Well, I can use that 1/4 that I was going to have, but if I add it, because it's a negative right now, I could get rid of that. So let's think about it this way. If I take 4 of my row 3s, oops, that's a 4. Let me zoom that in real quick. Okay, if I take my row 3 and I multiply it by 4, that makes it a +4. And then I take away my row 2. So it's a negative, so all I have to do is add it. So basically I'm turning this into a 4 by multiplying it by 4. And then I am adding that -4 with it. That would turn it into a 0. Okay. All right, so let's go through if that's what I did. I would end up with a 0, another 0, a -5/2 because I'm using fractions there. And then you'll notice that the numbers at the end are the same as the ones that I have in column 2. So if I did the same thing here, if I do 4 times a -1 right over on this guy, and I add it with a 4, that's going to 0 out also. So I'm going to end up with a 0 here. Okay. All right, let me get rid of all the circles in yellow. All right, so right now, looking at the goals that I have my 1, I have my 1, I have 3 zeros that are good. So of my next goals, I am trying to turn this guy into a 1. And then my last goals will be to 0 out these guys. Okay, so those are our goals. Let's see if we can get our next piece going. All right, so main focus is getting this bottom guy to turn into a +1. Well, that just means I need to multiply by my reciprocal. So if I take my row 3, I'm going to multiply it by the reciprocal. So 2 over 5. But I need it to be a negative so that it changes to a positive. So now we have 0 0, 1, 0. And I'm in good shape at this point, okay? I'm going to look at my middle number. My middle guy is not going to change it. I don't need any edits for him. I will in just a second, but I can't really do anything with what's on the board right now, okay? But what I can do is I can start getting rid of, let me change yellow. I can start getting rid of this guy using the one below him. Okay, so if I think about it like that, in my top row, if I took my row 1, it has a -2 in it, and I added 2 of my row 2's, that would be like saying -2 plus 2 1s. That would give me the number that I want here, which is a 0. Okay, it wouldn't mess with the 1. And then if I kind of go through with the rest of that, I'd be saying 1/2 plus 2 times a -3/8. Not pretty, but it's a -1/4. And I could do the same thing with that last number. So I could say, all right, 5 plus 2 times a -1 would give me a 3. Okay. All right, so I just accomplished my next goal. I forced a 1 here and I forced a 0 here. We are moving for the rest of these. Here's our last bit of our goals. Last part of the goal is I need to change both of these guys into 0s. Okay, so I need to edit my top line and my middle line. And we're going to do that using the bottom because the bottom is just a 1. So to do that, I'm going to take my row 1 and I need a positive 1/4. So I'm going to add 1/4 of my row 3. That's easy. I'm just multiplying it by a 1. Okay. When I do that, I get a 0. And when I do that to the third one, if I did 3 plus 1/4 of 0, I would end up with a 3 here. It's not going to change it. Okay. All right. For my middle row, I'm going to take the row 2 that I had, but I need to add a 3/8 with that to turn it into a 0. So 3/8 of my row 3, that's going to give me the 0. To write that out, if I did my -1 plus 3/8 of 0, it's not going to change. It's going to stay a -1. And this guy was already a 0. Okay. All right. That is the end of our reduced row echelon form. We reached our final goal where we have 1s in all the columns, which means that now I have my X, I have my Y, and I have my Z. So my points are 3, -1, and 0. That's my X, my Y, my Z. I will always suggest that you check. So if I go back up here to the top and I look at my original equations, I wrote them out down here with parentheses for all my blanks. Here's how I would check that. Let me zoom up for just a second. I would plug in a 3 for all of the X's, a -1 for all the Y's, and a 0 for all of the Z's, and then make sure it comes out to be what it's supposed to be. So if I look at this one, I would get 6 plus 4 plus 0. Yes, that makes 10. 3 minus 2 minus 0. Yes, that makes a 1. -3 plus 3 plus 0. Yes, that makes 0. When all of those are checked out and they work, that's how you know that you have the correct solution. If you plug them in and it doesn't, then you're going to need to check your math along the way. Not going to lie to you, when I was doing these notes as a practice swing, I did mess up on one of them. Okay, and I took -2 of something and I just didn't get rid of the fraction properly. Okay, it happens. Because you're going to be doing most of this in a calculator individually, but overall by hand, there is plenty of room for errors. So just go slow and be careful. Okay, that is one problem. We're going to go through and do the next problem. Okay, remember this is an optional note, so you're choosing to do this. All right, if you would, now that you kind of know what the format is going to look like, will you go ahead and set up? It's going to take us 7 matrices to get to a final answer on this one. So go ahead and pause the screen, copy what you see, and then we'll pick up. Perfect. Okay, so in doing so, on this first guy, our goal, remember, is to get a 1 in the first spot. And if we can get any 0s or other 1s, then we're going to go for that first. Here's my first 2 goals. I'm going to try and turn that first guy into a 1. And I'm going to try, because I have double 2s, I'm going to try to 0 out this one at the same time. Okay, and I actually put that line kind of in the wrong spot. Sorry about that. Okay. So in order to cut that first row down to a 1, I'm going to cut everything in row 1 in half. So that means I'm going to have 1, 1/2, 1/2, and a -1. In order to zero out my middle, I'm going to take my row 1 and subtract my row 2 away from it. So if I do that, I get 0, 2, -2, and a -8. My row 3 is not changing. There wasn't really anything I could do for that one right away. I could turn him into a 1, but it doesn't help me to do anything with that yet. So we're going to leave him alone. So 3, -5, 4, and 7. Okay. All right. Next goal, I'm going to try and zero out this bottom guy. Okay, so my next goal is to try and zero him out and turn this guy into a 1. Let me draw my arrow so we can write out what we got going on here. Okay, so top line is going to stay the same. 1, 1/2, 1/2, and -1. If I want to turn that 2 into a 1, I'm going to cut everything in half. So half of row 2. So 0, 1, -1, -4. If I want to turn that bottom into a 0, I'm going to have to take my row 3 that I have right now and subtract 3 of my row 1s. I'm going to have to subtract 3 away from it. Okay, so 0, we're dealing with some fractions. Careful with your signs. 13 over 2, 5 over 2, and a 10. Okay, this is one of the ones I messed up on originally. Okay, if you need to pause the screen, copy anything, that's fine. Otherwise, we're moving to the next one. Okay, all right, next thing that I'm going to try to do, my next goal is to try to zero out this guy. And I'm going to try and get rid of the fractions across this row so that it's not as tricky to deal with. So I'm going to be making edits to the middle row, middle row and bottom row. Okay. In order to turn that 1/2 into a 0, I'm going to have to subtract a 1/2. That means I can take my row 1 that I have already and subtract off half of my row 2 because it was already a 1. Okay, so that row is going to change. I'm going to have 1, 0, 1, and 1. That makes that line pretty clean. Middle row is not really going to change. I don't have anything to do to him right now. So 0, 1, -1, -4. The bottom one, I'm just trying to get rid of the fractions. I'm not trying to zero him out. I'm not trying to turn him into a 1. I could, but multiplying by 2 over 13 really just messes with everything else. So I'm going to just multiply everything in this row by a -2 just to get rid of the fractions. Okay, so we're going to keep it 0. Now it's a positive 13. It's going to be a -5 and a -20. All right, I just multiplied everything by a -2. All right, moving down here. All right, so we have a couple things left to sort out. We need to get zeros here. Got to get that first. Then we can focus on getting our 1 and zeroing out the rest of them. Okay, but we're going to have to get rid of that 13 before we can do anything else. Okay, so I'm only going to make one edit on this problem, or on this line. I can't do more than one on this guy. Keeping the first 2 rows the same, I need to do a 13 minus a 13, which means that I need to take whatever I have right now and subtract 13 of these away. So 13 row 2s. Stay with me. We are going to get some bigger numbers on this one because we're multiplying stuff by 13, but here's what that looks like. It's going to say 0, 0, 8, and then 32. Okay. All right, this makes our life a little bit easier because now that I've gotten rid of all my fractions, we should be able to stay fraction free. I want to get rid of this 8 and I want to turn it down into a 1. I get lucky that both of the numbers in that row are divisible by 8, so I'm going to cut that whole row by 8, 1/8 of row 3. Okay, so 0, 0, divide by 8 gives me 1, 32 divided by 8 gives me 4. Nothing else changed. We haven't been able to do anything yet until we got him down to a 1. So I've got 1, 0, 0, 1. All right, final steps. We need to turn both of these numbers into zeros. We're going to do both of those by editing using row 3. Okay, so on this one, I'm going to say I'm starting with my, oops, I did that wrong, sorry. This guy goes up here. I'm starting with the row 1 that I have, but I'm going to subtract 1 away from it. So I'm going to subtract row 3 away from it. Okay, 1 minus 1 gives me 0. 1 minus 4 gives me a negative 3. For the middle, I want to take the row I already have, so row 2, but this time, because it's a negative 1, I want to add 1. So I'm going to add row 3 with that. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. And then I am not changing anything on this 4. Okay? All right, now that I have my x, y, and z, I'm going to write them out as a point. Negative 3, 0, and 4. And I'm going to plug them back in just to make sure they work out. Okay? So negative 3 is going in for all the x's. 0 for all the y's. 4 for all the z's, and then we'll check. So negative 6 plus 0 plus 4. Negative 2, yes. Negative 6 minus 0 plus 12. 6, yes. Negative 9 minus 0 plus 16 comes out to be 7, yes. Okay, I'm going to zoom out for just a second. If you need to copy anything on example 1, now would be a great time to do that before we tackle one more problem. All right, before you try the practice, I would highly, highly encourage that you try one of these in the notes on your own, knowing that the way you do it might not be the way that I do it, okay? I'm going to show you with arrows before you freeze it and try it of rows that I changed to kind of maybe guide you in the direction. If you go a different way and still get the right answer, that is absolutely fine. Okay, only thing we really care about in the end is that you get the same 3 numbers, here that I do. Okay, all right, pause the screen. Why don't you try it and then come back and listen to my explanation? All right, first of all, I apologize that is not the right matrix. That is the one copied from above, so give me just a second to set that up. All right, so going here, first thing I want to do is make that a 1. So I'm going to take my numbers. I could either divide everything by 3, or what I chose to do is say 3 minus 2 makes a 1. So I did row 1 minus row 2. Okay. When I did that, I got 1, negative 4, 0, negative 5. That kept me from making fractions. If that's not what you did, that's okay. Second thing I did is I was trying to zero out, because I have a 1 there, I was going to try and zero out these guys, okay? So what I did was I took this one, row 2, and I subtracted 2 of the row 1s. Okay, so basically 2 minus 2. When I did that, I got 0, 11, 1, and 14. My first row did not change, so he was staying. For the bottom one, I did basically the exact same thing. I took row 3 and I subtracted 5 of my row 1. I'm basically doing 5 minus 5 to turn him into a 0. So I got 0, 24, 2, and 30. Okay, everything stayed whole numbers so far, also good. All right, next thing I tried to do is I was trying to turn, let's see. Oh, I switched them. So because this one was such a big number, I went ahead and put my rows, I just switched them backwards. So I switched these 2 guys. Okay, not necessarily what you had to do, but it's always an option to rearrange your rows. So I did, top row stayed the same. I put my row 2 on the bottom. So I had 0, 11, 1, and 14. But because I wanted to divide that bottom one down and make him a little bit smaller, I actually took that 24 all the way down and just divided by 24. So 1 over 24 of row 3 became my new row 2. By doing that, I got 0, 1, 1/12, be careful on that one, and 5 over 4. Okay. Little bit crazy, but I did get lucky in the fact that I have ones all the way across here. Okay. All right. Next goal is to try and carve out some zeros. So I'm going to zero out this guy right here. Here's how I'm going to do that. All right, I'm going to take my first two rows and keep them the same. Oops, I lied. I did change that middle one. I apologize. I'm trying to copy my own notes as I do this. Okay, so I kept the middle one the same. So here's what we did. Bottom one, I took whatever I had in row 1 and I added it with 4 of the row 2s. Okay, so I'm trying to create a 0 in this space also. So when I do that, I get 1, 0, 1/3, and another 0. On the bottom, I started out with my row 3, but I was trying to zero it out. So I have to subtract 11 of the row 2 items. Okay, so I have 0, 0. I know it's crazy again, but we got 1/12 and 1/4. Okay. All right, 2 more steps. On this bottom one, the only guy that I need to edit is I got to get him into a 1 before I can zero out the top 2 above him. So we're going to keep the top 2 guys the same for one more step. On the bottom, if we want to turn that into a 1, all I need to do is multiply him by 12. I just got to get rid of the fraction. So 0, 0, 1, 3. And we are finally ready to zero out the top 2 guys above him. So basically you're going to take the row that you already have, so row 1 and row 2. I'm going to subtract because both of those are positive, and I just multiply it by what I need it to match. So minus 1/3 of that row 3, and then minus 1/12 of that row 3. Okay, that zeroes out everything. Let's look at what I would end up with. So on the top one, I would end up with 0 minus 1/3 of 3. That gives me a -1. On the middle one, I would end up with 5/4 minus 1/12 of 3, which is saying 5/4 minus 1/4 is 4/4, or 1 whole. And then my 3 is the exact same on the bottom. Okay. All right, my answers coming out from that should give me a -1, a 1, and a 3. Hopefully you got the exact same answer, so let's plug them in to make sure we're right. All my x's are -1s. All my y's are +1s. All my z's are 3s. We get -3 minus 1 plus 3 gives me a -1. -2 plus 3 plus 3 gives me a 4. -5 plus 4 plus 6 gives me a 5. All of that came out correct. Hopefully that's, even if you went a different path, hopefully that's what you ended up with for an answer. If so, go ahead and pause the screen, copy what you got, and we are done with the notes for this problem.